I would like to call the Mendocino County LAFCO meeting to order. Could we have roll call, please?
Certainly. Chair Mulhern,
Here.
Commissioner Ward,
Here.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Present.
Commissioner McGordy,
Here.
Commissioner Roden,
Here.
Commissioner Horsley.
Yeah, I wonder what the plan is. You're our mentor. You're supposed to go mentor.
I'm sorry, we're getting
Our
some
mentor is supposed to
feedback.
tell us how to get sponsors and give us advice. Oh, okay. Embrace the
Commissioner Winkle?
probability of your imminent death. And
Commissioner Kristen, Commissioner Crane, and Commissioner Haschak. And we do have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to item number 2, public expression. The commission welcomes participation in the LAFCO meeting. Any person may address the commission on any subject within the jurisdiction of LAFCO which is not on the agenda. There's a 3-minute limit and no action will be taken at this meeting. If you are participating via Zoom, please raise your electronic hand or press *9 on your keypad if you're participating by phone. And if you are a member of the audience, you may come forward. Seeing no one come forward and seeing no hands raised on Zoom, I'm going to move on to item number 3A, the announcement of commission appointment and oath of office. And we are happy to welcome Catherine Cole as a special district member to the LAFCO board. If you could come forward and do your oath of office, please.
Thank you. I, Catherine Cole, do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California, that I take this obligation freely without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion, and that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties which I'm about to enter.
Thank you very much. And I believe that you could come and sit up here if you would like. Thank you and welcome. We're going to move on to item number 4, the consent calendar. The following consent items are expected to be routine and non-controversial and will be acted on by the commission in a single action without discussion unless a request is made by a commissioner or a member of the public for discussion or separate action. We have the minutes from March 6th. We have the March 2023 financial report and a legislative support letter for AB 1753. Are there any members of the board or audience that would like to pull an item for separate consideration? I'm seeing no hands on the dais, and
I'll move approval.
thank you.
I'll second.
We could have McGordy second that time. And I do not see any hands raised on Zoom, so roll call, please.
Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yes.
Commissioner McGordy,
Yes.
Commissioner Roden,
Yes.
Commissioner Horsley,
Yes.
Commissioner Cole.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
I approve as well. Thank you.
I apologize, Chair Mulhern.
That's okay. You might have guessed that I approved. Okay, we're going to move on to item CA, a workshop on preliminary fiscal year 23-24 budget and work program. So we'll open the workshop and have Uma, would you like to take this one?
Thank you, Chair Mulhern. Larkin is going to start a PowerPoint for us that
Okay.
will help walk us through this discussion. The Executive Committee met to review and discuss the preliminary budget and work program for this year for next fiscal year on March 22nd. The committee felt that with the number of new commissioners this year, it would be beneficial to hold this workshop on the preliminary budget and work program to allow for additional time and questions on the process and recommendations. I'm going to start off with an introduction to our budget development process and statutory requirements in establishing the budget and work program. The budget process is established under the Cortese-Knox-Hertzberg Act, or CKH, and requires that the budget be at least equal to the previous fiscal year. There is a provision that allows for less than the previous year, provided that the reduction would not impact the Commission's ability to fulfill its purposes and programs. Our budget and work program follow a fiscal year that starts July 1 and ends June 30th. The budget development includes identification of services and supplies and a work program detailing the staffing needs, the work plan, and any special projects proposed for the next fiscal year. Next slide, please. The budget includes all anticipated expenses and revenues and necessary to meet those expenditures. The expenses include staffing, services and supplies, the work plan, which includes the municipal service review and sphere of influence studies, and any application processing. Revenues consist of apportionment fees that are assessed on a 1/3 basis to our member agencies, which consist of the county, the 4 cities, and 50 special districts. The fees are determined by the auditor controller using a formula that is set forth in state law. Other revenue includes service fees, which are applied to application processing and interest from our banks and the Treasury. Next slide, please. The work program includes the basic services and work plan budget lines. Basic services is our staffing, which at this time consists of the executive officer and analyst positions. We are working on adding an administrative assistant, which would also be included in this line item. The basic services budget covers the tasks necessary for office operations and carrying out the policy and directives of the Commission. An example of those tasks includes policy development and implementation, agency outreach and involvement in regional planning activities, organization improvements, and budget development and implementation, and responding to public inquiries. The work plan consists of the scheduled MSRs and sphere updates for the year. And next slide. For the past decade and more, Mendocino LAFCO has been focused primarily on completing the work plan tasks and application processing. We've identified, in developing the work program for next year, staff is proposing to put more focus on addressing organizational efficiencies. We've identified a number of tasks that will emphasize better resource utilization and a more progressive and responsive organization overall. For example, the Policies and Procedures Manual was last updated in 2016 and should be reviewed and updated to meet legislative changes as well as improvements and additional procedures. We also propose to comprehensively update our application forms to clarify mapping requirements and submittal needs. That's going to take some coordination with other agencies and potentially some legal support as well. We also propose developing a streamlined procedure for reviewing the municipal service reviews and sphere updates so that that review is based on need rather than an arbitrary schedule, and that will support staffing efficiencies and make implementation of the work plan on schedule more attainable. Finally, we propose increased utilization of our legal counsel for tasks such as CEQA reviews and developing legal opinions, freeing up staff time for other priorities. Next slide. In developing the work program, we want the LAFCO organization to be successful, proactive, and responsive to emerging trends. And we also acknowledge the Commissioner concerns regarding timely implementation of the work plan, the emphasis for emphasizing the need for quality studies and identifying the need for a higher work plan budget to accomplish these goals. Next slide. The statutes under which LAFCO operates mandates the review of municipal service providers every 5 years as needed. We do have a local policy that further defines those municipal services as water, sewer, fire, and police services, which means that we prioritize regular updates for those service providers. Since the requirement for MSR and sphere updates went into effect in 2008, Mendocino LAFCO, as well as most LAFCOs throughout the state, have struggled to meet a 5 target for its 54 agencies. The majority of the first round sphere updates were completed in 2013 to 2018 by implementing a plan to quickly complete a large number of studies on a very tight budget. The direction necessitated abbreviated studies, which checked the box, but we're finding don't necessarily have the depth important for application analysis and big picture strategizing. The second round of MSR sphere studies have been scoped on an agency-by-agency basis with specific focus on issues facing the agencies. The second and third round sphere updates are an opportunity to delve into the service issues at levels that will better prepare the Commission to address the increasing development pressures and applications for reorganizations that we're seeing. Next slide, please. This graphic represents the rate of completion studies since 2008, and you can clearly see the abbreviated study approach versus the more comprehensive studies, which take longer to prepare. Also, with the abbreviated approach, the MSRs were done separately, with the sphere updates following. We found that doing the studies separately often required us to do some updating of the MSRs in order to make the determination for the sphere studies. We now prepare the MSR and sphere updates concurrently, which saves duplicative effort in the big picture, but also takes longer for us to prepare. A couple of things that aren't captured in this graph are the multi-year development of many of the studies, and also the application workload, which has been steadily increasing over the past few years and significantly affects staff progress on the work plan. Also worth noting, this fiscal year, we completed 2 long overdue sphere updates for the City of Ukiah and the Ukiah Valley Sanitation District. These 2 studies have not been updated since the 1980s, and through a highly collaborative effort, LAFCO was able to complete the multi-year studies with support from the agencies. Next slide, please. Each year, staff develops a proposed work plan as part of the budget development process. The work plan schedule is reviewed and prioritized based on the agency's provision of municipal services, the last date of the sphere update, and any pressing issues or development pressures on the agencies themselves. Additionally, for cities, we try to coordinate the sphere updates with their land use plan updates, which we were able to accomplish with the City of Ukiah this fiscal year. Implementation of the work plan can be accomplished by either by doing the studies in-house or by outsourcing the studies to consultants. And the challenges that we faced in implementing the work plan are staff capacity and budget. Staff priorities are operations and applications, which means that progress on the work plan tasks often slows down when we're otherwise busy. However, outsourcing the studies is more expensive, which makes the budget one of the primary limiting factors. Our current practice is to develop the studies in-house, which is less expensive, but often more time-consuming. The alternative is to outsource the studies at that higher cost. Staff is recommending that we outsource the studies for next fiscal year, which will allow staff time to develop the streamlined review process to apply to the 5-year schedule, and that we continue to budget work plan contingencies so that we can fund the outsourced studies. And you will find that that is the reason for the increase in the work plan budget line for next fiscal year. The work plan next slide, please. The work plan contingency, actually, I think next slide, sorry. The work plan contingency is the accumulation of a portion of unused work plan budget in a fiscal year and allows for more flexibility in implementing a work plan that often extends past a single fiscal year. It also allows staff some flexibility in changing from a planned in-house preparation to outsourcing the studies if the workload is limiting staff capacity. In developing the annual work plan, the budget does not cover any CEQA reviews over an exemption. So if an SOI update necessitates an initial study, the contingency funds could be used for that purpose as well. This year, the contingency is approximately $30,000. The preliminary work, next slide, please. The preliminary work plan proposed for next year is to complete the 7 coastal region and wastewater districts and 10 mutual water companies. One of the wastewater districts will be the first MSR sphere study, and that is Mendocino County Waterworks District Number 2. While we intend to initiate the development of these studies this fiscal year, the bulk of the work will be in the next year. Next slide. The preliminary budget is broken into 3 general categories: revenues, expenditures, and reserves. The proposed expenditures are an increase of approximately 21% over this year, and apportionments would be increased by approximately 3.6%. Overall, the increase in services and supplies accounts are generally consistent with the current CPI of 8.27%. Staff is proposing a 30% increase in work plan budget to support the outsourcing of those studies. In order to bring the operations reserves to the policy target of 25%, they would need to be increased by 11%. So there would be no change to legal reserves. The work plan contingency would see an increase of 22%, again to support the continued outsourcing of studies. Next slide, please. The preliminary budget is $320,500. Revenues would include $56,000 in cash available from collected service fees and underutilized budget from this fiscal year. The apportionment fees are recommended to be set at $275,000, which is a $10,000 increase over the current fiscal year, and that would be spread amongst the 55 funding agencies. This slide shows the budget and cash balance projections for the fiscal year and the options for next year's apportionment fees. Actually, next slide. There we go. This slide shows the budget and cash balance projections for this fiscal year and the options for next year's apportionment fees, the resulting impact on the budget and reserved, and the staff recommendations in the red box. Next slide. This slide is to provide some perspective. The graph demonstrates the variance between similarly sized LAFCOs. The top 3 LAFCOs are Butte, El Dorado, and Nevada LAFCO. We'll note that they have between 1.5 to 3 full-time employees. In addition to Mendocino, Humboldt, and Shasta, we have contract staff. To summarize the staff recommendations for the preliminary budget and work program for next year, staff recommends an increase in basic services budget for development and updating of policies and procedures. I'm sorry, next slide, Larkin. I forget to say that. An increase in legal services for research, legal opinions, and CEQA reviews, and an increased work plan budget to outsource studies and CEQA. And the next slide. Finally, this is our next steps. Our budget process requires 2 public hearings at the proposed budget and work program, and again at the final budget and work program. Today's workshop is an optional step that the executive committee felt would be helpful, particularly to our newer commissioners, and to gather input and any public feedback before we distribute the proposed budget to the funding agencies. And that concludes my presentation, and I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you very much. For all of the commissioners, you should have a highlighter in your top drawer. It can be used as a signal that you have a question or a comment. If you want to use that, you just put it up, and then I know to call on you. Otherwise, I'll be looking for any questions or comments from commissioners. We'll go to Candace first.
Thank you. I have 5 questions, basically off of page 20.
Candace, turn your...
Thank you. I have 5 questions, basically off of page 23, and I really appreciate having this extra workshop. Thank you for the executive committee in doing this. It stated that there's a significant increase in applications. How many, what's the increased percentage or number compared to how it was several years ago?
We typically processed one about one application a year, a fiscal year. We currently have, I believe, 4 applications on file. They are all on hold pending the tax share negotiation process.
Okay.
So we anticipate that those are going to move forward quickly once the master tax share is adopted between the county and the cities. And we also are anticipating a number of other applications from special districts.
So, and I think you stated in here that it would take 6 months to a year to go through an application or complete an application?
That has been the typical timeline, and that's to accommodate that tax share negotiation process.
If there is an agency, I'm looking at the work plan, if there is an agency that can provide staff, like the city of Ukiah did in the Sand District, to complete a MSR or an update to an SOI, would you be willing to consider going that route if they were going to give a significant amount of time towards that?
We could certainly consider that. If that has been worked very well with both of the last 2 MSR sphere updates. It still takes a pretty substantial amount of staff time and coordination, but we also recognize the many benefits in going that route, such as the relationship building and
Right, that really
and collaboration.
can make a huge difference. I know there probably aren't, in looking at the districts, there probably aren't a lot of agencies that could provide that, but there might be a few, I don't know.
It's an excellent point. Thank you.
Okay, and do you see your hours remaining somewhat the same or increasing if you're taken off of the work plan side of things?
So there would still be staff time that is budgeted, included in the work plan budget for coordination of those studies and working with the consultants in those developments. We did propose an increase in the basic services somewhat to provide time for developing procedures and going through the policies and procedures manual and updating policies. So we do see some organizational improvements that we would like to do, and that's included in that basic services line.
But compared to the time that you spent this last year, are you just shifting your hours or are you adding additional hours?
It would be adding some hours, a small amount of hours, so it would go from 125,000 to 133,000
Okay.
for that budget line. But the scope of work would be shifting to away from preparation of the work plan,
Right.
preparation of the studies to more organizational improvements.
What is meant by streamlining the checklist template?
Something that's been discussed a number of times over the last few years is developing a checklist type approach to reviewing MSR and sphere updates on that 5-year schedule. So as we do these comprehensive studies, it's staff's belief that we don't need to necessarily do another comprehensive update in 5 years. So the state says that we have to review the spheres every 5 years as needed. So that little as needed caveat there on the end, this would be a way to approach that so that we could say we looked at them, we did review them, and we do not believe that they need a comprehensive update this time around.
Would LAFCO staff be doing the checklist or the agency?
LAFCO staff.
LAFCO, okay. Legal usage, you feel that there's a need to increase that?
We are in the process of reviewing proposals to establish a new contract for legal services. Many of the proposals includes hourly rates that are much higher than the ones that we have been working under with the contract for Scott Brown. So we anticipate it'll be a higher rate. It may be a higher rate, and then we'd also like to utilize their expertise more in development of legal opinions and asking for support in responding to CEQA reviews. We are referred EIRs and various CEQA documents that we provide comments on as part of the regional planning efforts. And it would be much more efficient to have the CEQA experts provide those comments.
Sure. The CEQA reviews, is that mainly for applications?
It's, for example, we received two CEQA, I'm sorry, like the referrals, that's the better word for it. Two CEQA referrals, one from the city of Ukiah on their proposed pre-zoning of areas outside, of parcels outside their city, and also one from the city of Willits, who is working on a land use element update. So we review and we provide comments, written comments to those agencies for incorporation into their CEQA process.
And well, I have questions on the draft budget, but I guess I can wait till or do you want me to ask them now?
You can ask them now, or we have other commissioners that have questions. It's
Okay,
up to you.
why don't they go ahead and then I will. Thank you.
Okay, I'll go to Commissioner Gonzalez and then Commissioner Ward.
Okay, kind of a question maybe,
Just checking if your microphone is on. Thank you.
okay, kind of a question for Uma or whoever has the answer. I know that the tax share agreements are mostly with the cities, but it affects the districts, some of the special districts also, because I remember Anderson Valley was doing something and there was a question of, is this tax share agreement also going to, how does that work for bringing in the districts on those negotiations?
So there's a master tax share is in process for the cities, between the cities and the county. Any application we receive from a special district is required to also go through a tax share negotiation process, but it does not fall under that master tax share.
So that'll be its own separate,
So it'll be how we've done them in the past, where they are on a case-by-case basis.
because it seemed like that kind of stalls sometimes when they get there, and I guess that's the concern I have as far as something hitting a brick wall. So,
We have had significant delays on the tax share process, yes, over the last year.
all right. And then the other question I have is, I think somewhere I read that we would be going to a kind of a 10-year review. Is that, did I read that correctly in there as opposed, I know there's the 5-year, so that's what the purpose of the checklist is that we would then force ourselves at the 10-year mark if we've looked at this? Am I reading that right? I'm trying to think of where I read that.
Sure. One of the proposals that we have is development of a procedure for review, a streamlined review of the MSR sphere updates. So the statutes require 5 years as needed. This would be a checklist that would allow us to review those that actually need a comprehensive update and those that can be delayed for that, closer to that 10-year mark.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Ward and then Commissioner McGorty.
Thank you very much. Candace, good questions. You hit a lot of what I was wanting to get to, so thank you. Back to the work plan. It was stated in this year's budget that we were going to be doing, besides the Ukiah and the Sand District, we were going to do the inland and coastal. And we approved those work plans at $25,000 and $20,000 each, which make up $45,000. Now we're looking at doing the coastal at 100. It just doesn't make sense to me that we would go from 20,000 to 100,000. So that's one item. When was the last time we did the the inland water districts?
Both the coastal and the inland water districts were done in that I think it was like 2013 to 2015.
Well, there's 2014 we did the coastal ones, but I didn't see the inland ones.
They were part of the Ukiah Valley MSR.
Okay.
And then individual sphere updates were done in the, I think, 2015 and 2016.
So you don't think, because of the consolidation issues coming, I would think that we'd want to concentrate on the inland rather than coastal. We've already done the coastal in 18 as well as the inland. It's my opinion we should be doing the inland in lieu of what we just went through with the city of Ukiah and the Sand District. That's just my opinion. It was in our budget this year, but again, it wasn't done. So I find it difficult to believe that it would go from 20,000 to 100,000 but we'll talk about that again later. With regard to CEQA, I mean well, let me back up. You state that the cost of living, or the CPI, is 8.2% for this next fiscal year, correct?
That is the current CPI and what is being used by many of our vendors in establishing their budget for next, or
So we're using
their bills.
something that's outdated, basically, to go forward, because it is an 8.2 in the future. Right now, it's, who knows, 6%? You know,
The 8.27 is what is used by CALAFCO in establishing their fees, their membership fees, as well as their conference and workshop fees, and is also being used by SDRMA for our insurance, and so it seemed a good measure to move forward with in our budgeting.
I wish I had that. Bookkeeping, we talked about this at the executive committee. You're really anticipating another clerk for this next fiscal year, hopefully, right?
An administrative assistant.
Administrative assistant that would do the bookkeeping procedures. Or do we pay you $110 to do it as opposed to a $40 person?
Well, I think that what we're finding is that there are pretty substantial benefits in the executive officer doing the majority of the bookkeeping. It streamlines the effort in collecting the reports in support of the audit at the end of the fiscal year. There are some components of the bookkeeping that can be done by an administrative assistant, provided they have the skill set for that.
Yeah, writing checks, inputting into QuickBooks, that's pretty menial work. So, with regard to the legal fees, they're going up $11,000. I am on the committee. I guess we're meeting after this meeting to look at the 8 bids. I don't see it that being $9,000 increase, especially the one I'm encouraging to go with. It's not much more than maybe $1,200, $1,500 a year. So the point that I think Candace was making too is on these CEQA things, are we going to, if it's, I think it's mainly for applications, not for our work plans. We've already gone through the work plans. I don't see a CEQA being an issue in that work plans. But if it's an application CEQA, that's going to be paid by the applicant, not our budget. So I'm concerned about that, having that additional cost. So, and I can go into it later. I know Candace has questions on the budget. I do too, but I'm recommending that we keep the apportionment fees the same as they are this year, not increase them. And I have other reasons why, but that's the last I would say.
Okay, Commissioner McGordy?
I just have questions on the apportionment process and how that works and how the fees are set.
The apportionment fees are a formula that are set forth in state law, and they're applied by that formula is applied by the auditor, and who sends out the invoices on behalf of LAFCO and collects those fees and holds them in treasury for us. The formula is a 1/3 basis, so it's 1/3 of the apportionment, overall apportionment is paid by the county. 1/3 is divided amongst the cities, and 1/3 is divided amongst the 49 special districts. It is further calculated based on the operating revenue of the previous fiscal year. So then it is a percentage based on that operating revenue is applied to each of the agencies.
And just to follow up a little bit on Commissioner Ward's comments about reviewing the inland water systems with consolidation of potentially of some of the different water districts, is that taken into anticipation as something that LAFCO will be involved with?
Well, it's not clear to me yet at what level they are attempting to consolidate, since LAFCO has not been pulled into those meetings yet. The intent in waiting on the inland water districts was to allow for the process that they have underway to get a little further along before LAFCO gets involved in doing the municipal service reviews and sphere updates. It was initially our intent to do those studies in an effort to support that consolidation effort. But there is a significant amount of funding that is available for a short period of time, is my understanding, and that is coming down through the State Water Board. And there's considerable effort between the city and the water districts to develop studies and go through that process. And again, I don't know the details or the exact status of that, but our thought was to wait until that gets a little further along before LAFCO starts our reviews.
And then on the review of the coastal water districts, that seems kind of breathtaking increase from 20,000 to 100,000. What's going on that would cause such a massive increase in fees?
So again, this has to do with the outsourcing piece of that process. We had estimated 20,000, which was originally for the water districts on the coast, in the coast region. We have since included the wastewater districts, which is what was done in the 2012-2013 effort, and also expanded the scope of that to include those 10 mutual water companies. We have received a couple of phone calls that have asked us to also consider at least some information regarding some of the private water companies on the coast, because there has been expressed interest in consolidating some of those services in the smaller communities over there. So the increase in scope and also outsourcing those studies. As we found when we had started to look into outsourcing the Ukiah Valley Sanitation District MSR and sphere update, the estimates we received were around $40,000 and $50,000 plus. That was for one single service special district.
And in these studies, what would you hope to learn from them? Because the capacity of most of these companies is pretty well maxed out. There's very few districts that could expand service to anybody because they're almost unable to deliver water presently to their existing customers.
That is, those are definitely some of the things that we would want to know and pull out and make determinations on for those agencies. They were last completed in, I believe, 2014 for the last sphere update, so they are over that 5-year review period. But we have found also, particularly in the drought planning and the drought response process that the county was facilitating, that there was a lot of information that we were not able to capture, that we were not aware of, such as the hauling in between and the support between the special districts. That's very important information for LAFCO to consider in establishing spheres and recommendations for consolidation or for efficiencies of service.
Okay. Are you in the loop with the present studies going on by EKI associates who are looking to prioritize and write grants for water delivery improvements in some of the coastal areas?
We aren't,
Okay.
and those are really important things for us to be aware of so that we can, those studies and that information gained in that will probably go a long way towards helping us with those, our process as well.
Okay, I'll make sure that you're in the loop.
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Roden? I think maybe your microphone's not on.
I wasn't clear if Commissioner Ward was asking questions or making comments, but, okay, well, staff didn't have an opportunity to respond, but Commissioner McGordy followed up with some of those questions, but one that I recall that you haven't been able to respond to yet is about the CEQA review by legal, who our legal representation. So would you care to respond to that? Because it isn't about applications or MSRs. It has to do with requests for comments, right? So could you clarify that? I just felt like there was a question that didn't ever get answered, and it seemed more like, anyway, people needed to hear that.
Thank you, Commissioner Roden. So the CEQA reviews that we're referring to we often get referrals from other agencies requesting comments on upcoming CEQA reviews for the projects that they have going on, whether it's a general plan update or a project that is happening in an agency sphere, such as the city of Willits. It's really part of that big picture regional look at development that LAFCO should be involved in, and that's part of the proactive approach that we are proposing that LAFCO take. At times in the past, we haven't had the staff availability to prepare comments. We took quite a bit of time to prepare some substantial comments on the City of Ukiah's general plan EIR. We are currently working on comments for the City of Willits' effort to update their land use element, which they do anticipate requesting a sphere amendment as part of that process. So again, it's very important that we we are involved in that. Larkin and I, it takes us a lot of time to research all of the CEQA requirements and what is appropriate for LAFCO to comment on in those CEQA documents. By using legal counsel, who is much more adept at that and has that at their fingertips, it's a lot more streamlined for them to provide those comments, and they certainly have the expertise.
Thank you. Are there any other commissioners with questions? I see Commissioner Horsley, you have your hand up. Let me just check online. And I don't see any hands raised online. So back to Commissioner Horsley.
It makes perfect sense to have attorneys look at those CEQA issues because it's so complex. Absolutely. So does LAFCO pay the costs of these EIRs for the MSRs and the SOIs if there's EIR CEQA issues? Does LAFCO pay that cost, or does the agency pay the cost?
That's an excellent question, and has been one that we haven't had a lot of experience with, because these spheres that we have adopted have generally been coterminous, which allows us to prepare a CEQA exemption. For those agencies that wish to expand their sphere, in the past, the practice has been that the agency has the option to request that sphere expansion, and then the CEQA would be prepared at cost to the agency. We did attempt to put that into policy a few years ago, and that did not go over well. We had some significant public backlash on that. So it was dropped for the time being, but moving forward, our work plan budgets do not include CEQA, which can be anything from $500 for an exemption to $20,000 for an initial study to $100,000 for an EIR. Mm-hmm. It's a case-by-case basis. It depends on what an agency, what the proposed sphere is for an agency and the potential impacts. So it's impossible to really gauge what that would be ahead of time.
But I'm assuming that they could use the same CEQA review or document for anything else that they had, like for county review or whatever. They could use the same EIR. So if the agency pays for it, that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's often, particularly for cities, why we try to coordinate along with their general plan updates, because then we can piggyback off of the same CEQA document and for a much more efficient and cost-effective approach.
On page 28, there's a little table there. And what it looks like to me is that you're recommending a $10,000 apportionment fee increase. And that's all it would be 10,000?
Correct, that would be spread over the 55 agencies.
Okay. And I'm assuming that any of the MSR, SOI work for these little water agencies that you've been discussing, compared to like the city and the sand district, it'd be minuscule comparatively because they're so small?
They are a lot smaller. I think there's going to be a lot of new information available to us, I hope, through that came out of that drought planning effort and the response. But they should be a much smaller effort.
Okay.
But we also haven't heard from them as far as what they, believe is best for them as far as consolidations. The MSR and sphere update process is a time to, that LAFCO can support those efforts if they make sense. And so that can take some extra coordination and time and putting the information into the MSR that will support those.
For the local valley consolidation, the water, yes, they are trying to meet a deadline where they would sign an agreement, but I think a lot of the details still have to be worked out for how, they're talking about up to a year that each agency would continue with their own billing and all of that, so I don't think that's been determined yet.
Thank you.
On the preliminary budget changes, this is page 32. You talk about a rent increase of up to 5%, but I got a different number. Instead of 7,500, I got 6,825. That's a 5% increase.
On page 32, account number 5500, the rent.
So we calculated out the rent for the rest, or for the first 6 months of the fiscal year, and then the rent increases by 5% in January.
Calendar year, yeah.
It follows a calendar year. So it's the calculation, I can double check those numbers, but it's a calculation of the rent that are under our contract for the first 6 months, and then we anticipate that 5% per the contract for the next calendar year.
Okay. So the 6,500 was the budget versus, it doesn't include the increase for the 6 months?
That is our budget for this fiscal year, and it does include those calculations.
Oh, it does.
So-
If you could check that, that'd be great. I just got a
Okay.
totally different number. And then also on the internet, it looks like a 20% increase. And my calculations may be off, but if you could check that too, I'd appreciate it. Anticipated county service, was it county services? Oh, the legal, I think you've already answered that. And that's all I had, thank you.
Thank you. I will call on myself. I'd just like to thank staff for including the inflationary charges anticipated. I think that if we were to move forward without including those, then the commissioners would be wondering why we're so over budget. So preparing and planning for that is really important. I also recognize that there's several line items that LAFCO works with the county, and as hopefully most of you know, our county employees did receive a 2% COLA. So there are some additional costs that are included in the budget, and I appreciate making room for those. I think that one of the important things for the commission to consider as we move forward is that in the past, there has been challenges with getting the work completed, and although there's additional expenses for outsourcing, I also think that it's incredibly important for our county, cities, and special districts alike to be able to move forward as we do anticipate some changes, at least in the Ukiah Valley, and who knows exactly on the coast, that we are helping prepare our communities for that, and specifically for the smaller districts, smaller water districts and wastewater districts that are on the coast that don't have the technical skills or possible budgets to be able to move forward with some of the important work that needs to be done for anticipated growth, whether that be in housing or tourism or what have you. You know, it's our job to help our communities prepare for those changes. Commissioner Ward?
Thank you. So it was just a few years ago, our apportionment fees were $135,000. Now they're over $100,000 more, and the work plan is not going forward as much as I'd like. Most of the problem, I think it was stated in our minutes, is that you have a heavy workload on applications and staffing limitations. And you also said last month that the priority now is applications over work plans. Well, I'm having a little difficulty with that because I'm looking at our budget. I mean, the applications basically is your revenue. It's your expenses, it's your revenue. You can do whatever you want and how you do those. But I'm concerned about this budget, and it's going up. And now we're throwing consultants at it because we don't have the workload to do the in-house items. So that's my biggest concern. And here we are raising it again. And I know I just represent the public, but I know there's a lot of districts out there that don't have the money to continue to see our costs go up and work plans going down. Just applications are coming in. So I'm concerned about that part of it. Of the work plan for this next fiscal year for the coastal, how many CEQAs do you have to do?
It's unknown at this time. What we budget for is for exemptions. So if an agency has a coterminous sphere, or we can make a finding that there is going to be no significant impact or no anticipated impact, then we can do an exemption.
As Commissioner McGordy said, there's probably not a lot of more activity going on over there because there's a lack of water. I would anticipate we're probably going to be all coterminous again, and there won't be too much CEQA. I think the CEQA is going to come about from applications, which again, I will state that that's not in our budget. That's for the applicant to pay for. So anyway, I just was concerned about it. I can come up with I'd say about $30,000 why we don't need to increase our apportionment fees. So again, I'd state that for the record, I just would like to see our apportionment fees stay the same, and just state that they're 100,000 more than just a few years ago.
May I respond?
Yes, please do.
So I would like to point out, as Commissioner Ward mentioned, or stated that our apportionment fees were $135,000 a few years ago. Our apportionment fees, over the last 10 years, and I can provide a graph in our next public hearing if that is helpful. Apportionment fees were up around the 200,000 mark about 10 years ago, and they decreased significantly down to the 125,000, even at one point, to 135,000 per year. And the reason that that decrease happened is that the work plan was not being completed. So each year, the budgeted work plan was rolled over into the following year, and so it had it allowed for an artificially lowered apportionment fee to be adopted each year, as that the work plan budget rolled into each consecutive year. We went through that Mendocino, LAFCO basically spent down the excess money from that deferred work plan. And so we hit the point where we had to increase apportionment fees to actually match our expenditures. There is an increase this year. And again, that's to outsource those studies. I also wanted to note that the CEQA costs are not included in this budget, either for the work plan, either in the work plan budget or in legal services budget. So that is not reflected in this budget, those CEQA components. But that is the reason for the artificially lowered apportionment that occurred for 4 or 5 years.
Commissioner Roden, Horsley, and then Gonzalez.
Well, the way I see it is that we have to find a balance. We only have so much revenue. We have, you know, our work plan, the requirements, and then we have anticipated applications. And we're trying to figure out, and staff is making recommendations about how to balance our revenues with what we have to get done. And so by using staff, Larkin and Uma, to work on applications, I think that makes sense. They know the people, the issues locally, and it makes sense for staff time to be spent on applications as well as the policy development and the improvements in organizational, you know, in our organization. And even though it's expensive to hire consultants to do those MSRs, what else are we going to do? We could hire more staff. I mean, it's just a bitter pill that we have to take, I think, to get our work done at the same time that we, you know, have to pay more to get our work done. It'd be nice to have local people complete those MSRs on the coast. Maybe we'll find someone on the coast who can do those, and it would be a lot less than getting an out-of-county consulting firm. But I support trying to do it this way. We should give it a go. So anyway, that's how I feel about it. Thanks.
Commissioner Horsley?
There is a possibility that once we catch up, that this budget could actually decrease.
So what I want to try to clarify is that, you know, we recognize that the continued commissioner comment that the work plan is not getting done. So the approach that we are suggesting is twofold. One, it's to increase the work plan budget to outsource the preparation of those studies so that they get done more timely. The other component of that is to, in doing so, we will free up staff time to develop this streamlined procedure where we can review these, do the 5-year review to determine whether or not a substantial study needs to be done in that agency. So that would hopefully streamline the process and identify those agencies that don't need to have a full-blown MSR sphere update. So it would shorten our time or lengthen our timelines in needing to prepare those big studies. And also, so yes, the intent would be to lessen the cost of those studies over time. I also want to note state that when we do a comprehensive MSR sphere update, it's with the intent that we don't have to do that same comprehensive update in 5 years. So this two-pronged approach where we outsource to get caught up and also give staff time to develop that procedures for streamlining the process is anticipated or expected to be a cost savings over time.
Those were the reasons I was thinking that. I guess we'll see. I'm sorry, I did have one other question going back. You mentioned inconsistent mapping requirements. Could you explain what that is, please?
Sure. So an issue that has come up in the last year and a half has been the mapping requirements that we have for LAFCO applications. Our applications are required the mapping for our applications are required to meet the Board of Equalization standards, which we do ensure, and we work closely with them to do so. There's also a component that works with the county surveyor's office and who has different mapping requirements. So one of the things that has come up in the last year and a half is a discrepancy in those requirements and what the applicants need to meet to satisfy the requirements of the application. So we have to work with county staff and the Board of Equalization and really nail that requirement down so that it's not such a difficulty for the applicants moving forward.
Thank you. Commissioner Gonzalez and then Commissioner Ward.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo what Commissioner Roden had talked about this, finding that happy balance, and that this is a preliminary budget workshop. And I would support legal going up just because having been on this board now long enough, I've seen where we get into this kind of quandary about questions. And with the caveat that you guys are looking at our legal right now and that it may shake out maybe not as much. Maybe it's a contingency amount that we carry. So I wanted just to kind of put that on the record that I would support that. And as far as consultants, I'll be honest with you, same thing. I've noticed we've kicked the can a couple times because either we couldn't get to it or the agencies didn't have the information, not knowing who didn't have what. Even my own town, Willett, sometimes during some of our stuff didn't have what it took. I would inquire, why are we holding things up, et cetera, and I would get, we don't have this. Not everybody has the budget Ukiah has to throw their own people or consultants on it. So, so to that extent, I know we're still shaking this out, but I would support that. And I do appreciate the interaction there with Candace and Jerry here, bringing up these good points. I think we do need to have, when we're discussing the public's money, we do have to have these discussions. So that's what I have.
Thank you. Mr. Ward.
Thank you. Sorry to dwell on this. I do want to see a balance, I'm not here to argue about how our apportionment fees were, a few years ago, but we did get things done. We have all our MSR SOIs done. They're not timely, but they're done. So I just don't see where we're going to spend $100,000 on consultants to do something that's just an update. We've done the SOIs, we've done the MSRs. I just think that we could still keep our apportionment fees down on that. I'd rather see, and I brought this up at the executive committee, hire consultants to do the applications and leave you to do the work plans. Apparently that doesn't work, but it would seem to me that that would be the best process. Or encourage you to hire more staff to do these applications and utilize your expertise, yours and Larkin, to do the work plans. One work plan, we should be doing a couple more a year. And if you look at our past budgets, we were doing 2, 3, 4 work plan, SOIs, MSRs, and now we're just going down to 1 because these applications are taking up so much of your time. So I would encourage, and I would encourage if we could do more work plans, having a higher budget. But I don't see it this year. So that's all I have.
Well, just regarding the employability of folks in Mendocino County, I think that we all recognize that there are barriers for people that have the technical skills that are required. I don't think it's as simple as Hinman & Associates just going and picking up somebody to handle the workload. And I do think, as far as I know, that UMA has been searching for somebody to even fill an administrative assistant position, which the county being one of the larger employers, it's incredibly challenging to find employees. So the ability to use resources of outside consultants to be able to get the work done, I think is probably going to be more efficient. I do think that there may be savings. We know that our budget from this year looks like it's going to have some savings in, conferences. Maybe we're going to have savings in legal expenses. I think that we may be able to look at some of that, but I do want to see the work continue to get done. And I wonder, Uma, if you could just comment on your ability to be able to find staff to complete these tasks. I know you've certainly been searching, and I just want to be realistic about what the expectations are for you being able to hire somebody. And then I see Commissioner Roden's pen.
Thank you, Chair Mulhern. I appreciate the opportunity to speak to that. We have been soliciting for both a planner analyst as well as an administrative assistant, and we have interviewed and gone through well over 100 applications at this point. We have not yet found somebody suitable that with the background necessary to fill these positions. It's difficult to hire a part-time employee to support on these tasks. The part-time status is not something that most employees are looking for, so that definitely complicates the hiring process and the availability and interest. I also wanted to say that it is much easier to outsource the work plan tasks, the MSR and sphere updates, because there are quite a few consultants that do that kind of work, whereas not so many consultants that do the application processing work, because it is so specific to a region or a locale. We are looking into possibly working with a temp agency for temporary administrative support. So that's another option we're going to look into this week.
Thank you. Commissioner Roden?
That maybe there are local consultant planners who wouldn't be hired, employed by Hinman and Associates, but maybe contracted. I mean, I can think of a few, well, two that I know of who might be more than qualified to do the MSR SOIs and would probably be less expensive than an out-of-county firm, that doesn't know anything. There would be a lot of catching up to do. So anyway, I just honoring what Commissioner Ward was saying, I think that we might be able to get less expensive consultants, possibly. And the other is that this probably wouldn't save a lot of money, but I think we don't need our legal counsel at every meeting that we have. They seem to be at all our commission meetings. I don't know if that's necessary, but it's something we could talk about. And we had legal counsel at our executive committee meeting, and didn't need her. And so that's something we can look at is, do we need to have them attend every meeting, or maybe we just call on them when we have questions? So 2 potential minor savings.
Please feel free to send the resumes to Uma. I'm sure she'll gratefully accept them.
Yes, thank you.
Any qualified applicants. So this was a preliminary workshop discussion. Our next meeting, we will have the actual budget hearing, and I'm just looking for commissioners, any specific tables or items that you would like to see come back at the next meeting. I'm sure that the team can include this full packet, but I'm just wondering if there's any specific clarifications that you want called out in advance of the next workshop.
I had something.
Sure, Commissioner Roden.
Yeah, at the executive committee meeting, you showed that graph with the horizontal bars, and you showed it again here. And I don't know if they were exactly the same or if you had changed them, but
The cities and the districts had been added.
it had the different, maybe that was it.
Yeah.
It had different counties. And I remember that when I really studied that bar graph at the executive committee meeting, there were some interesting conclusions about that I had made. And I don't remember what they are now, but I think maybe going back and looking at that, I think that might be useful. And when presenting it, to draw conclusions from it, because today we just got a quick look at it, but it was sort of like, well, what are the implications of this bar graph? And we didn't get that today, and we didn't get it really at the executive committee meeting, but after I looked at it for a long time, I started to pull some useful, information out of it, and I think we should do that again. And I would like to, I could look at the original one and recollect what my conclusion was.
Could we include the PowerPoint in the agenda packet?
Sure.
For the next meeting? It would have that, more details for the commission to consider before the meeting so they can ask questions. Commissioner Horsley.
I just want to thank Uma for your patience and maturity in answering the questions. Really appreciate that. And the fact there's so much detail in here, it's a lot to read, but boy, it sure does make it easier to come to decisions, to have all this information. And the PowerPoint did have some extra slides that I think are important, so I would appreciate that also, to have that included.
Thank you. I will post the PowerPoint on the website after our meeting today.
Thank you. Commissioner Gonzalez, did you have it? Okay. Okay. No problem. So ready to move on to item number 7A?
You want to invite public comment?
Oh,
on the
I'm sorry.
workshop?
I'd like to invite public comment for the, apologize, the budget and work
Thanks.
program.
Am I on here? Can you hear me through the mic?
Yes.
Hello, hello.
No.
Scott, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Getting a thumbs up. Hi, everybody. I'm Beth, General Manager for the Russian River Flood Control District. I'll be presenting in a minute on something else, but since I'm here, I thought I would offer a few thoughts. For a couple of you remember that I used to work for LAFCO. And I will say, in addition to the sort of, as Uma very well put it, the artificial rollover when MSRs and SOIs weren't completed in previous years. We had this sort of artificial rollover that allowed us to reduce or keep low the apportionment fees. You will recall, Commissioner Ward, we went through years of this reserve drawdown issue. The reserves were considered higher than necessary, and so the apportionment fees were adjusted to sort of burn down that reserve. And Uma, I can't remember if you were part of that at all, or if that was previous executive officers, but that was a pretty big issue. And I think that when we're looking at year-to-year apportionment fees, that also can make it look a little disproportionate as to what's happening. Also, I was here during what I call the major catch-up of the MSRs and SOIs that were done under a previous executive officer. And my recollection in supporting that effort was that these MSRs and SOIs were very streamlined. They didn't get into the detail because the intent was to remain, get into compliance and get through them quickly to have something there, right? That was the big issue. We got to get these done. We got to get these done. And the intent was that in the next round, as needed, they would be more detailed and dig a little deeper. And now we have we have additional things happening. We do have the drought, which has highlighted a lot of the weaknesses. We have the private water companies. We have the small, what do they call them, state smalls, those sort of things that aren't necessarily, the JPAs, all these things that aren't necessarily regulated by LAFCO and the MSRs. They're not paying apportionment fees, but they're really integral to the big picture of what's happening. So, for example, the Russian River Flood Control District, we are in the Russian River watershed. We span across many other special districts, particularly the water districts I'm thinking of. And so everything that happens with those water districts can impact what's going on with us. So it's really difficult just to look at one of these MSRs in a region like the Russian River and have a comprehensive picture. You've got to have a big scope picture, and I think that's it's a really important aspect. And they do take a lot of staff time. So being a general manager of a special district who's in charge of a budget, we have ratepayers, we try to keep everything reasonable, obviously. What was it, $10,000 increase in apportionment fees? I think spread out over all of the apportionment fees, that is absolutely expected and reasonable. And I do appreciate the effort to keep apportionment fees down, but our MSR and SOI is coming up, and I want it done. I want staff to have the funding to be able to support us in what we need to do in order to adapt our MSR and SOI to support how we are addressing massive and quick changes in the climate and weather whiplash, drought, floods. And so the last thing I need to hear from LAFCO is, sorry, we can't get to this right now because we don't have the funding. And I don't want you to put that onto Uma. That's she's working so hard. And the staffing issue, oh man, same. And we commiserate. We're like, have you heard of anyone? What's going on? And Uma has been looking for a long time, and we've been talking about it many times, trying to support one another in that effort. The part-time issue is a huge issue. And so, we've come up with some creative ideas and we're supporting each other. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you. It looks like we do have a question
question.
from Mr. Ward for you.
You mentioned your MSR SOI for the Russian Rivers. You realize it's like 3 or 4 years out?
My understanding, I haven't looked at today's packet as far as the
It's quite a few
timeline.
years, that's a couple, 2 or 3 years out. And I'm trying to get them done
Is that a
sooner.
question or just a comment? Do I need to
Well,
respond to
no,
that?
Do you know that that's 2 or 3 years out?
The last that I had looked, it was, and spoke to Uma, we were thinking it might begin in 2024.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to go to any online comments, and you can raise your hand. And I don't see any. Okay. So at this point, now we can move on to item 7A. Okay. Did you have a question, Principal?
More of a suggestion, but it seems that if we have a part-time employment issue, maybe 2 agencies get together and create a full-time position. Just a thought.
Thank you for that. Sounds like something that they've been thinking about. Okay. We will move on to item 7A. And this is the informational presentation on the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency and the activities. And we have Beth Salamone from the Russian River Flood Control District to present.
Great, thank you. So I'll do my formal introduction. So my name is Elizabeth Salamone. I'm the General Manager of the Mendocino County Russian River Flood Control and Water Conservation Improvement District. I do believe it is the longest name of a special district in California. But everything about that name is important. The flood control, less so than anything else, but now, things are changing, so we'll see. The flood control portion of our name was actually initiated with the development of Lake Mendocino. That was the flood control project. But in my many hats that I wear in my position, one of them is I'm the chair of the Technical Advisory Committee to the Ukiah Valley Basin Sustainable Groundwater Management Agency. And so, is Glenn here? Glenn's not here. Oh, was he?
Glenn had a phone call and had to
Oh,
leave.
great. I was just going to say,
He said you had it all under control.
I just wanted to acknowledge that Commissioner/Supervisor McGordy is the chair of the GSA, as we call it for short, the Groundwater Sustainability Agency. Anyway, here I'm just going to give you a little spring update on what we've been doing and what's next. Next slide. Oh, I don't have my glasses on. So last year, we've spent quite a few years putting together the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, and then as mandated by SGMA, the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, we had to put together a plan, a groundwater sustainability plan, and that is a GSP or plan. The Ukiah Valley is considered a medium priority basin for several reasons, which we could get into on another conversation offline. And therefore, our GSP, our plan, was due earlier this year. We did submit that on time, and the Department of Water Resources, DWR, has 2 years to review and respond to that. In the meantime, the GSA, the agency, is expected to implement the plan as though it was approved. Next slide. So this is a map of the basin. It is, again, there's a Groundwater Sustainability Agency with there's 6 seats, 4 of whom are financially contributing seats. You can find more on the GSA itself on the website. And then we also have a Technical Advisory Committee, which I mentioned I chair. So we meet about quarterly at the moment. During the plan development, we met more frequently, and as we have grant applications and funding coming in, fingers crossed, additional projects will mean additional meetings. We're tasked with maintaining groundwater resources consistent with the plan and the plan's goals, and we have to submit annual reviews to the DWR as well as do an update every 5 years. Sounds familiar, huh? Next slide. So how are we doing in the basin? So if you see these 6 little icons, these are what the DWR teasingly calls the 6 deadly sins. And so these are the 6 main things that we're looking for: lowering of the groundwater levels, reduction of storage, seawater intrusion, degraded quality, land subsidence, and surface water depletion. So as you can see, the NA, seawater isn't a really big deal inland at this point, hopefully. Surface water depletion and lowering groundwater levels are sort of a yellow light, and then we've got green light on the other 3. So how we decide how the status of the basin is we demonstrate progress towards sustainability goals, and we do that through setting sustainable groundwater management criteria. So these are all things that are laid out in the plan. We say what our goal is, how we measure that, and then how we are going to work towards any improvements necessary. In the Ukiah Valley Basin, what we're finding, or what we found, was that we really didn't have enough data to have a strong response. So we set sort of broader goals and criteria, and we're really improving our monitoring so that we can have a better picture of what's going on. We are working on our 2nd annual report at the moment, which is due in April of 2024. Yeah, Mari.
What is like lowering groundwater levels and reduction of storage? You would think that those would be
they're very
related,
similar,
right?
Because,
yeah,
so sorry to interrupt. I get excited and yeah. No, I get it. Yes, so lowering groundwater levels, so that'd be groundwater table under the ground. And then reduction of storage, we have a reservoir that we consider in the Ukiah Valley Basin. So the groundwater levels, to what the monitoring allows us to have information that we input into a model, and then we can determine to what degree the groundwater and the surface water in the rivers and the reservoir how they're connected, how they relate to one another. So you could potentially, and I'm not saying this is the case, but you could potentially have lowering groundwater levels that were negatively impacting stored water, requiring for more water to be released into the system.
Are you talking about the Lake Mendocino Reservoir?
Yes.
Are you talking about a natural? Okay, I was thinking.
No. The reservoir being Lake Mendocino, yes.
Okay, thanks.
Sure. I'm glad you asked. Next slide. Yeah, please feel free to pause me if you have questions on a particular slide. Again, on the status of the basin. So again, I said about monitoring. Here's a little diagram of some of the monitoring equipment that we have. We have monitoring wells and stream flow gauges, and there's just a little bit more information about that. And then the data is used in a model, as I mentioned. So we can model things like climate change impacts there's some standard criteria that the state issues, or there's various different sets of criteria on climate change. We can look at things like the diversions from the Eel River to the Russian River through what is now called the Potter Valley Project. We can model changes to that. We can model changes on supply and demand, balancing those out. Next slide. I guess I jumped the gun a little bit. So next slide. So what's happening recently? The GSA did apply for what they call an implementation grant. So the plan has been developed, and now we have to implement the plan. And the GSA applied for funding from the Department of Water Resources, particularly to implement groundwater sustainability plans. We have a number of projects that are included in that bundled application, and depending on the amount of money, then we have those prioritized so we can go right down the list and implement those programs. Next slide. And here are the programs, or here are the different projects that were included. So funding to help us finance the 5-year update, which can be quite costly. Funding to help a water supply reliability study, and this will help us to better understand the basin's supply issues and reliability. Again, we have a lot of moving parts, particularly in the Russian River, Mendocino County, so this will really help us to understand that a lot more. Recharge master plan and pilot project implementation. If any of you drove down Highway 101 or down Old River Road in the last month or so, you might have seen vineyards underwater. This is nature's way of kind of reclaiming a floodplain and flooding an agricultural field in order to, well, nature just does it, but then that water infiltrates down, some of it all the way down to the groundwater table. And depending on the hydrology and geology, some of it will actually return back through the soils and rocks into the natural streams. In the river or its tributaries. And this is really helpful. This is a great way to use stormwater in order to improve and maintain the health of our groundwater table. And it's not really simple. It's not a one-size-fits-all. We have to find the locations where artificially flooding these fields, for example, or other lands can benefit the groundwater table. It can also take off some of the pressure of the flooding tributaries and rivers, which the governor just issued an executive order addressing that in order to sort of streamline the ability to take some of that stormwater and move it both to benefit the flooding issues and also, again, to benefit groundwater recharge. But we have to do a study to figure out the best places to do that and then how to do that. Because when the river is flowing very quickly during storms, it's an infrastructure issue of getting that water out safely. Jerry had a question? You'd have to go on the website and look. It'll be in the packets for the GSA. We have our own general manager for the GSA. However, if we have him come and do the presentation and be able to answer those questions, we have to pay him. I just do this out of the kindness of my heart.
So you anticipate getting funding this year?
Yeah, we do think we are very eligible for this funding. It's possible we might only get enough for the first couple of projects. They're listed in priority here. I believe that there's the ad hoc committee with the GSA looking at funding has continued to meet to try to obtain other grant funding.
So if you don't get total funding, then some of these projects are just going to be pushed to next year?
Correct. We'll continue to look for funding. Some of these projects may be, like the recharge master plan and pilot project implementation. That's something that the flood control district we have in our strategic plan. So we may find funding in the meantime and then be able to coordinate with the GSA in order to implement this. So that could be a cost that's, taken on somewhere else. The city of Ukiah might do some of that work in a related project. So the beauty of the Groundwater Sustainability Agency is that the members, it's a communication network and a collaboration, right? It's a coalition of efforts for the Ukiah Valley. So it's a way for us to share information and support one another as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, just a question on your groundwater monitoring.
I think your mic.
Sorry. On the groundwater monitoring, is that real time or is that just checked over a series of time?
Well, that's really interesting. We had been doing only twice a year, and those timings were insufficient really to get good information. So during the drought, we said, well, we need to really take advantage of the conditions right now. And so we implemented a monthly monitoring program of those groundwater wells. The DWR, we did receive funding, so there are some wells that are taking more frequent, and it may be real time. Again, that's someone else's area. I'm just giving a general here. But then the stream flow gauges, there's various different monitoring locations and efforts, and they are taking different data. But that is something we're working at more and more, and the State Water Resources Control Board actually has received funding to implement a telemetry pilot program, and they are looking at the Russian River as an option for that. So that would mean real-time data on surface water diversions in the Russian River, which can be really helpful. Yeah.
Commissioner Horsley.
Beth, could you tell us under water supply reliability study?
Yes.
What is the definition of basin supply reliability?
That's a great question, and I don't have an answer to that at the moment. But again, a lot of this information can be found through the website, and the website will be listed on the last slide, I think. And so there will be materials there that can answer those questions.
What does it mean, I guess?
I was not part of developing this application, so I cannot recall what that project development was, but we could definitely get you a copy of that. I think it's probably linked a lot to, as I said, the Eel River to Russian River diversion, which I know you are very familiar with as we work on that together.
I think it would be great if we could get a copy of the slideshow presentation and then also have it uploaded to our website.
Yep, it's on the website now. I believe I checked out this morning. This is on your website.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
And it may be on the GSA website as well. I'll make sure it is. Rate and fee study, right now there are 4 of the 6 seated members of the board, GSA board, that are financially contributing. And this rate and fee study will allow for a consultant with expertise to provide alternative options that are more equitable so that the board can shift those rates and fees more appropriately. Interconnected surface water, groundwater, that goes back to Commissioner Roden's questions a little bit about the criteria, and the groundwater well inventory study, which may be wrapped up into the rate and fee study. I'm not 100% sure how that's going to move forward. Next slide. A little bit more about the rate and fee study. I'll just let you read that in your own time. Next slide. And here's the new website. One of the accomplishments we've had in the last year was that the GSA was able to move away from county staffing and legal counsel for supporting the development of the GSA during the GSP development phase. It was deemed that we need our own folks. So we have a general manager and we have an independent legal counsel. And one of the things they did was also move the website out of the county's system into an independent one. And they are continuing to update this website with more information. You can find a lot of great things on there. Next slide. Well permitting. So this is a big issue some of you may have heard about. There was a governor's executive order that was issued during the drought. And the real intent of this was to put a pause on well drilling because as surface water was less available, there was a concern more and more groundwater wells would be drilled and then negatively impact groundwater basins, especially those that were being reviewed and monitored and regulated by groundwater sustainability agencies. Now remember, this whole effort, SGMA, as we call it, Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, is statewide. So there are other areas in the state that are in much worse situations than we are and some who are in better situations. We're somewhere in the middle, but this executive order was across the board. So that means if you want to drill a well, you have to have the well permitting agency, in this case the county, has to have a enhanced procedure. And if there's a GSA that is in this, if the well permit is for an area that's within the GSA footprint, the GSA and the county have to work together. So the GSA and the county here are working together, and they are trying to develop a process and ordinance, I believe, on the county side. The GSA is pretty much ready to go with that. The county has a lot more obstacles that they are working through. We had a workshop a few months ago, and we are having another one April 17th. This issue, this well permitting issue, does not include small domestic wells, nor does it include water supplier wells. So it really, in our community, it really addresses mostly agricultural wells. So this is another effort to engage with our agricultural community and try to address their concerns through this. The executive order is not permanent. At some point it will be rescinded, and these requirements will be rescinded unless there's a bill that comes forward making them into law. So we're trying to get this right the first time, but it does make sense that there is some sort of communication happening between the GSA and the county in issuing well permits, but also that, well permitting has been primarily administrative in the past. We really need to start understanding when we are drilling new wells, how that might impact pre-existing wells and the overall sustainability plan. Next slide. So we do have quite a few. The question is about constructing new ponds. So we have quite a few agricultural ponds in the Russian River watershed and also in Potter Valley and Redwood Valley. However, there's a couple of things with those. One, they're very expensive. Two, they remove agricultural working lands for a farm. So that's that much less land that they're able to use. And three, they require a lot of permitting that can be really held up at the state. So we have quite a few. I know that the Farm Bureau is working on keeping an eye out for additional funding to add a few more. There are a few farms that are looking for to add some. So if you know of anyone who wants to get on that list. But generally for the funding, as usually the case, we have to have a minimum to really make the effort to get the grant funding to implement those, to put more in. And kind of along those lines would be an additional reservoir. My district recently looked at potentially another reservoir location, and it was very clear from various state agencies that it would be a huge uphill battle and probably would never be permitted. So that was very unfortunate. That could have given us a little bit more, but we continue to have hope that we'll figure out. We have storage in the ground available, as I was saying, with the groundwater table in various areas. We're working to better manage our Lake Mendocino Reservoir through various things like the forecast-informed reservoir operations, the potential of improvements to Coyote Valley Dam, and other means.
Commissioner Horsley.
If some of these studies are completed and we get more information based on the fact that our valley is so narrow and deep and the groundwater, as I understand it, is at the top now due to the rains that we had, is there any potential, in your opinion, for us to go to a low priority groundwater basin?
I know that's the hope of many that are involved in the Ukiah Valley Basin Groundwater Sustainability Agency, but I attend many of meetings hosted by DWR regarding SGMA. I'm on the Association of California Water Agencies. I'm the Region 1 board, and I'm part of the Groundwater Committee and working groups associated. And there's nothing coming down the line at all, no discussion whatsoever of medium priority basins being downgraded. The clear message from DWR is that this is going to stick around, and if anything, once they're sort of caught up with the GSPs, the plans and reviews, they may in fact extend the review of basins, simply because the weather whiplash, the climate changes are going to impact. They're going to impact us in ways we just aren't really sure. Scientists thought what we're experiencing now wouldn't happen for another 30, 40 years. So the state is really gearing up. Because we need to, make sure we have water for our basic economy and communities and health and safety.
Thank you. Commissioner Ward.
I was going to wait till you're done, but I think the biggest issue we have is we need to store more water. Instead of letting it all run off, we need water, let's store it. And that's why ponds, reservoirs, these kind of things we should be pushing more so we can have more. So I don't know what your group does to help that, but that's something that I think we need, because it's just a waste of, we do get rain, we're not collecting it.
Absolutely, I completely agree. And yes, we work on that on all fronts, all efforts.
Yeah, I think that's a legislative effort too for our state representatives, that every district and city should be talking to their state representatives about. Francois.
Looking into that as a possibility? And
Yes, and that was one of those projects. If you go back a couple slides
Oh, okay, so I missed that.
it's the, I forget the name of it. There we go. Recharge Master Plan and Pilot Project Implementation.
Okay.
So while we would love to artificially remove water from the stormwater, excess water from the waterways at the moment and put that somewhere it will infiltrate, we don't know the best places. So
Right.
nature takes care of it to some degree, as I was mentioning. And then there are studies being done, but we need to have a very collaborative and expansive study done on a master plan for where and when and how to keep costs low and to get the best benefit. So one of the hurdles of removing water from stormwater from the system and putting it on land is the use of energy to do so. So we're looking at creative ways to move water that we don't have to pay to move water.
gravity.
Yeah, unfortunately, the valley sort of goes this way, and we want to get the water back up,
Okay.
so, yes.
Thank you. Do you want
I
to
think
just
that
go
was
to that?
it.
There was one
Was there one more
final
slide?
slide
Maybe
that
just
provided,
like-
some information about how to find
There
the
you
GSA website. The most recent video is also on the Mendocino County YouTube.
Yes.
That people could go and watch that meeting if they wanted to.
Yes,
Are there any commissioners with final questions?
great.
Ms. Hinman?
Sorry, it was muted. I just wanted to speak to Commissioner Ward's comment about storage. I believe that the city of Fort Bragg has received a significant grant for developing reservoirs over on the coast, and we actually will see a part of that as the city is seeking to annex some large pieces of land into the city boundaries for that purpose.
Yes, I've read a little bit about that, definitely.
Thank you, Mr. Ward.
What about Lake Mendocino? Is we raising the dam? Are we going to dredge it? We need more storage in it. How are we going to do it?
As I said, if you look at my district's strategic plan, we have that as in our strategic plan, increasing storage. Dredging Lake Mendocino is not a possibility, and I won't get into that right now, but it's been looked at and it's not going to happen. Raising Coyote Valley Dam would be an excellent idea for many reasons, and Mendocino County Inland Water and Power Commission, of which some of you are members, very much so, is the local host for that effort. So a feasibility study needs to be done. Really what we need is legislative support for that. So IWPC is working closely with Congressmember Huffman in order to try to find funding for that feasibility study, which has, it's $1.5 million local match at the moment, which, probably will end up being more.
Won't that wipe out all the campgrounds for Corps of Engineers?
I don't have the details on that.
I think it would.
Commissioner Horsley has some insider information.
Yes, it would wipe out some, but that was planned for. So when the Corps redid their sewer system, I think it was about 8 years ago, they raised the whole thing way up in anticipation of this dam increase. And that's what they're doing slowly, is they're increasing everything. Now, Boucher might be okay, I don't know, it's pretty high. But everything else, they're just slowly raising.
Or the road to it.
Yeah, or the road too.
underwater
Oh, yeah,
right
the
now.
road, yeah. So we just applied for a $500,000 grant to the Huffman's discretionary fund for the Corps to start the new feasibility study. The question, we were told that there would be no matching funds. Now that's in question, I guess. It's amazing how that changes in a matter of weeks. But so that has been submitted, and we won't hear back for maybe several months, up to 6 months, whether we are going to get those funds or not. But the Inland Water and Power has submitted a letter of intent, and the Corps has accepted that as the local sponsor for the feasibility study and potential raising of the dam.
It's unfortunate we finally get the lake full and we can't use the campground, at least on the one side this year. They're underwater.
Well, they may be open if the
A lot of cleanup.
if the lake comes out. So that's probably a topic for another time.
That's a
I'm
different
happy to
topic,
talk
yeah.
about inland recreation until my eyes fall off with the Russian River and Lake Mendocino and the Great Redwood Trail. I mean, I will bend your ear for hours. But I think that wasn't necessarily our topic for today. And we are running just slightly behind schedule. So I'll check in if there are any other questions. Thank you very much for your presentation. Did you have final comments?
I want to say thank you. I really appreciate it. I know this isn't a direct issue for LAFCO. It's a sort of an indirect, but I'm really happy to be here. A lot of you are involved in this directly and could be helped more indirectly by talking to Congress members. Jerry, please give them a call. In addition to the Groundwater Sustainability Agency, you may have heard that there is fluctuation and uncertainty in the Potter Valley Project, which is the diversion from the Eel River to the Russian River, and many changes happening there. In response, the counties of Sonoma and Mendocino have collaborated, and we are building a Russian River Water Forum. And Commissioner Horsley and I are very involved in that. So in the future, as things flush out a little bit, I'd like to come back and give you an update on that as well. And this is a way to collaborate. It's sort of building a coalition and meeting place for interests in Lake County, Humboldt County, and Mendocino County regarding mostly the Russian River, but also as it is related to the Eel River, and will address a lot of these larger project ideas such as additional storage. So there's things that can be done in Sonoma County that relieve the pressure on Lake Mendocino, for example, leaving that stored water more available for our users up here in Mendocino County. So it's really important that we keep up to date on what's happening in Sonoma County and support those efforts. It's all one water.
Thank you.
Thank
very
you.
much. Thank you for your presentation. We don't have any commissioners or public online, so I'm going to assume that there's no questions. And we are on to agenda item 8, information and report items. And I'm just looking to the commissioners and staff to see if you need a 10-minute break before we go on to this item, or if you'd like to just power through. All right, I'm getting a power through. So Uma, if you would like to go on to item 8A, please, the work plan.
Thank you, Chair Mulhern. This is the workload and applications. So the applications on file are all pending tax share agreements. We do have 4 applications that are waiting for the tax share negotiation process to be completed by the county. We also have received a new pre-application request after the agenda packet was distributed. The City of Fort Bragg is requesting initial review and guidance for annexation of several newly acquired properties. These are for those potential reservoir over there. Our goal is to respond to the pre-application requests within 30 days, so we'll be working on that. Excuse me. For the work plan, we are working on developing an approach to the Coastal Region Water and Wastewater Agency studies and hope to initiate that very soon. I don't have anything specific to add to that, so if there's any comments, I'm happy to respond.
Commissioner Roden and then Commissioner Ward.
Yeah, just a question on the coastal MSRs that you want to get started on. Are you going to look for a consultant for those, or are you going to get started? Staff going to get started? What are you thinking?
Well, we first need to scope them. So we'll scope it a little bit further, and then we're going to start initially to outreach for a list of consultants that might be available or interested in submitting a proposal.
Mr. Ward?
Yeah, the City of Ukiah out-of-area service agreement, looks like they're 6,000 in the hole. Are they going to give us a check?
We did receive a check
You
on
did?
Friday, and that
Okay.
has been deposited.
Thank you.
I use my microphone. We will move on to item 8B, correspondence.
Thank you. We did include a letter in the agenda packet. This is correspondence to county staff in response to another request for legal citations for regarding LAFCO's authority over CSAs in general, and also the requirements for activation of latent powers for the Sherwood Road pilot project. So the letter includes a lot of good information, including a summary of the last 18 months of the coordination and communications between LAFCO and county staff. So that is in your packet, and if you have any questions, specific questions about that, please let me know.
Commissioner Roden?
Yeah, I thought it was kind of interesting that county council was asking our council to do work that it just seemed like should have been their work. You know, I mean, they're attorneys. They can look up what powers LAFCO has over CSAs and stuff. And I guess I don't know, how do you decide when you say, okay, we'll pay for that research instead of you? I don't know. Oh,
I see that Marcia is on the Zoom. Did you have a comment on this you'd like to share?
I would. And I agree. I mean, generally speaking, you know, county council does have an obligation to research those things and you know, figure out what LAFCO's role is and what their role is. But we really have been communicating for the better part of a year, you know, much of what was in that letter. And it just didn't seem like we had succeeded in getting through to them that LAFCO really does have a role to play here. So after some conversation with UMA, we decided to go ahead and send the letter that he had requested.
Thank you. I will also just say I'm the only county supervisor currently sitting here, but I'm going to follow up with the executive office about this item in particular. So I think that the county council has a lot of items on their plate, but I also know that we have outside resources for LAFCO type conversations that we could utilize. So I'm going to speak to the executive office about perhaps making a change regarding that. And Commissioner Ward and then Commissioner Horsley.
What's the purpose? What was the purpose of this inquiry back and forth? I mean, I don't understand why we had to spend so much time on it. What the purpose was.
Marcia, do you want to speak to that, or?
So just so I make sure I heard the question is, what was the purpose of the kind of the back and forth, the exchange?
Yeah.
Well, and UMA might be able to speak to this as well, because there were initial sort of coordination meetings between LAFCO staff and county staff regarding the process of moving forward to activate latent powers for CSA 3. And I think there were multiple meetings where, and also some correspondence, which I believe may have been attached with this correspondence regarding that process and the timeframes for, making the application and then moving through the LAFCO review and approval of activating those latent powers. So there was just some interest on the part of the county in exploring, what that process would look like. And so, there were many meetings and exchanges, which ultimately resulted in this conversation with county council where, he felt that maybe the LAFCO didn't have authority to, be involved in that process, thus the letter.
I find it interesting that county council was our council for several years in the past. And now they don't think we don't have the ability to do what we would do. That's a little strange.
I can add a little bit to that. We have been working with county staff for over 18 months now on this topic, and we did explore it at length and provided feedback to county staff through the CSA 3 MSR sphere update process. Throughout that process, there was a change in county council that was involved in that process. We were working with Council Raff, who is no longer here, and Council Curtis has come back into the process only recently. So I think there was a request for clarification, and we spent a good amount of time putting together the timelines and the record of correspondence to demonstrate the amount of coordination and also the responses to LAFCO, from LAFCO to the county on this topic over the last year and a half. There's been a number of board items that have come up on this topic, and there has been some confusion at in the presentation to the board, I believe, on whether or not LAFCO has any role in this. We wanted to provide a very clear record of the message from LAFCO to the county on this topic, as well as a clear answer as to whether LAFCO has jurisdiction over CSAs.
Commissioner Ward, did you have a follow-up before?
So that's what's driving it, is the CSA 3. That's what's really driving it.
Absolutely.
Yes. Commissioner Horsley?
Just in reading it, it looked to me like it was a difference of opinion on the interpretation of the law on the county council side versus our attorneys. It just looked like there was a difference of opinion there, and it kind of went back and forth.
Okay. We're going to just check if there are any comments online, and I do not see any. And with that, we can move on to item 8C, the CALAFCO Business and Legislative Report. And Director Hinman, it seems as though there's a vacancy that you're noting in your agenda.
Yes, so we have one item of business, and also we've attached the current legislative status report to the agenda packet. Mr. Tom Cooley from Plumas County was the CALAFCO Northern Region's city representative. He did pass away earlier this year, and they have issued a call for nominations to fill that seat. The deadline for submitting our nomination would be April 13th, so it does need to be a city member, so that would be either Commissioner Roden or Commissioner Gonzalez. If there is interest in putting forward a name for the CALAFCO board, then if we could get that direction today, and then we could submit that by the deadline.
Thank you.
I believe they are 4 years, but I'm not, let me see.
It says that this term expires December of 2024. You'd be filling a vacancy. I'm assuming that with the changes in the meeting requirements, that there would be some travel required to attend these meetings? Or are they conducted virtually?
I think that they have historically met virtually.
Okay.
Yeah, it really would.
I'll volunteer to do it for 1 year, and that would be the extent of my commitment, just filling the term.
Okay, well, I'll nominate Mari and it's through all of the northern region LAFCOs, right? So that would just be Mendocino County is saying this is our person that could attend?
Well, there could be other
So-
people
Yeah, there could be
nominated.
other applicants as well.
I'll second that.
Commissioner Ward, did you have a comment or
Might have to
question?
campaign. No, I don't have any more.
Okay,
I'll second.
okay. Larkin, could you please do a roll call?
Certainly. Commissioner Ward,
Yes.
Commissioner Gonzalez,
Yes.
Commissioner McGordy is absent, Commissioner Roden,
Yes.
Commissioner Horsley,
Yes.
Commissioner Cole,
Yes.
and Chair Mulhern.
Yes. And thank you for also including the bills in the agenda packet. There's a lot of them to keep track of, and it's just helpful to have them all in one place. So thank you for including that. We can move on to the item 8D, the Executive Officers Report.
Thank you. Just want to note that we are in the process of reviewing the legal services proposals. We do have a meeting at the staff level immediately following this meeting. And then we will be scheduling an executive committee meeting within the next 2 weeks. We'll be considering the proposals and then developing a recommendation to the full commission for its May 1st meeting. As a reminder, the 700 forms were due April 1st. So we do need wet signed copies of those 700 forms in the office. We just have to hold them in the office in case they're requested. But they do need to specifically name LAFCO. Also, commissioners are required to submit 700 forms upon being seated and when leaving office. I believe I have yours, so I think we're all set.
Thank you.
I don't think I have anything else at this time.
Commissioner Ward?
So you're meeting with staff today on the legal items? Or do we need to be there, or do we wait till the executive committee?
No, you need to be there.
Okay, and where are we meeting?
We'll be meeting in conference room B.
Okay.
Thank you. For committee reports, I think it went well, having the budget workshop sort of extended today to have the conversation, so I appreciate the dialogue that we were able to have, and just offers a little bit more transparency beyond what was discussed at the executive committee. Commissioner Ward?
I said everything at that meeting that I said today, so there was no secrets.
Thank you. Are there any other committee reports? I'm not seeing any. And then any other commissioner reports, questions, or comments? Commissioner Cole, welcome.
That's mainly it. Thank you so much for welcoming me today, and I'm really looking forward to working with all of you, and I just wanted to make that very clear. Thank you so much, and I'm sure you'll have my contact information be on the website, and any questions or things that I can help. I'm with the Hopland Cemetery District, so that's where I'm coming from. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, and with that, we can adjourn. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Love real paper. It's so nice. I knew I was